喋れればハリウッド進出も夢じゃなくなるわ。
You might want to take a little rain check on that one. Cold open for this one was actually a scene from later in the episode, so won't say too much just yet, though may as well get at least one dad joke out of the way.
Hi, dear. Here it is.
Strange, that doesn't look like a deer. Thank you. I'll be here all... The episode proper opened with all the Ojamajo at their school entrance ceremonies, including Pop, who was entering into primary school that year. Of course, they also had to line up according to their class assignments, so Doremi was separated from her friends, but hey, look on the bright side, at least Ompu isn't in the same class as that creepy Stan from season 1 anymore. Granted, I would be careful of this kid.
Wipe that grin off your face!
Later, Doremi would tell them about her little mismatched class. Kind of obviously based off of the cold opener, Momoko had some issues that will be the primary focus of this episode, but until then, there were other kids who stood out in worse ways, like Sugiyama of the former Stooges, who tried his hand as a solo act and did about as well as most SNL alumni. And of course, like most failing comedians, they have to go to the racist jokes by the end. Needless to say, this season was already getting on my good side. Granted, it did lose a few points when they let Screechy talk about how that one kid from One Punch Man was in their class, but you can't win them all. Still, this did lead to Reika talking about how she believed that she'd be the actual standout of their class. Of course, everyone has to go with the obnoxious Sunde when you could have gone with the far superior Kudere. Now, of course, they were talking about Momoko, who was gaining notoriety because of her looks, though not so much her social skills, as Doremi revealed that she was suffering from language barrier issues with her only being able to understand and speak some basic phrases. Now, of course, normally, this wouldn't be too surprising, as it is a common issue for students studying abroad, or even returnees like her, except for the fact that she was communicating just fine in the last episode when they were at the Beholdo end. Yeah, again, more on that in just a bit, as we also need to introduce a new supporting character for this show, in the form of the other Ojamajo's homeroom teacher, Yuka Nishizawa. Modern educators in a nutshell. Though she could stand to have her hair look a little bit more like rainbow vomit. Back with the non-TikTok sensei's class, Reika decided to go full Queen Bee and tattle about Momoko having an earring, which in the very conformist Japanese school system wasn't allowed. Also, nice touch of Doremi trying to warn her about it ahead of time, but Momoko probably didn't understand her at first, as she was calling it a piasu or piercing, which while that is the general term for what an earring is, it isn't the term we normally use to describe them rather than just the direct term itself. Seki did eventually manage to tell her that the earring wasn't allowed and that she needed to take it off, but the returning Ojamajo refused.
This is my treasure, and if you're telling me to take them off, I will not come to school anymore.
Moments like this were definitely where they needed a VA like Nami Miyahara, who was fluent in the language, in order to really pull this off. Like, it kind of goes without saying, but when you get an actor who clearly doesn't understand the language, it's pretty distracting, even if you're not familiar with the language yourself.
Konnichiwa, Oka-san, Oto-san.
What? Now, of course, it's not always necessarily a bad thing, and hell, could even lead to some entertainingly memeable moments, especially if your name happens to be Joseph Joestar.
Help me! Oh my god!
But for a scene like this, yeah, obviously we shouldn't be laughing, and should feel bad for Momoko, who is having a hard time adjusting back to Japan, having integrated herself into the US for the past several years, and clearly the earring was connected back to those better times for her. I mean, her delivery's not perfect, and the vocabulary in her script does feel a little Google Translate-y, but it was still good enough, and it didn't feel that disconnected to her very emotional facial expression, so yeah, good job all around for pulling this off in a way that feels more like Lost in Translation and less Blood the Last Vampire.
You should really try not to worry too much and just enjoy the festivity.
Anyway, Doremi later informed her friends about the incident, and the original Ojamajo trio decided to pay their new friend a secret visit. Thus, they traveled by broom and then took on some disguises. Then later, Doremi would try to find her one true husbando. Also, personally, I prefer their roach disguises, if only because they remind me of a very underrated waifu. Not that it really mattered, as they quickly ditched the disguises after they learned they could just talk to Mrs. Asuka about her daughter, as she could speak Japanese, and honestly kind of sucked at speaking English, in spite of, also having temporarily moved to America, and probably needed to speak more than her daughter. In any case, they learned more about Momoko's situation that at first seemingly was due to them forcing her to speak English at home in preparation for their move to the States. I say seemingly because one, I'm not sure if that alone would completely prevent her from speaking her first language, as she did at least use it through kindergarten, and two, in Momoko's case, she seemed to have a particularly strong aversion to speaking Japanese rather than just a simple inability. The possible reason for which we will discuss in just a bit, but regardless, her speaking Japanese in the previous episode was all the more confusing now, so they decided to recreate the situation by going to the Mahodo again.
悩み事があるならさ私に言ってよ一緒に考
Y'all really need to learn some bear sign language. Like, maybe you should take some lessons from Polnareff.
パンツー丸見え
Oh, and hey, that purple girl was in the show too. Well, anyway, Momoko finally revealed how she was able to speak fluent Japanese in the last episode, which, not too surprisingly, had to do with their magic when they were witches, or magic tech when they were patisseries, as their intercoms acted as a very early Google translation app.
アメリカにも玉木さんそっくりのメアリーって子がいたわ。
And for some reason, she sometimes makes these really weird faces. Also, nice touch having two recordings of Nami Miyahara overlap each other in English and Japanese, though it is a little hard to hear the former for comparison. Anyway, she explained how she got her earring from the Majo Monroe she mentioned in the last episode, who took her under her wing. And as it turned out, she was the actual reason Momoko had become fluent in English, and as a result, she was able to make friends in the foreign country thanks to this kind old lady. And of course, she one day discovered that said lady with witch in her name was in fact a witch. Thus, she went through her own solo version of season 1 of this show, got her jewel, and would have turned her back to normal, but...
私はもう寿命なの
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Yeah, I know this might make me sound just a bit heartless, but this part of the episode didn't quite hit with me. I mean, we've hardly gotten to know this character, and while I do understand and sympathize with Momoko, it's just kind of hard to feel bad when we don't even know why she was croaking. I don't think it had to do with the frog curse, otherwise Majoriko would be in a lot more trouble, so we can only assume natural causes. Regardless, it was just a little too sudden of a death to really sink in and not feel forced. That said, the scene that followed was not only much stronger, but I would argue probably one of the most poignant moments in the whole series, as Momoko ended up using her fresh new crystal to try and revive her mentor, which of course didn't work, and fortunately only resulted in her losing her approval to be a witch. And I gotta say, I like how Aiko pointed out how their situation with Ombu was kinda similar, but very different, in that they were trying to revive her from a coma and not death. The former was arguably just carrying an unfair punishment for one girl who was kind of abusing her power, while the latter was trying to undo an entirely natural occurrence that no one should have any control over. Basically, it's just not right for magical girls to use their godlike powers to actually play God, as no one should have control over the cycle of life and death. Unless your name is Monica. But yeah, at the innocent age of 9, Momoko had already experienced all the ins and outs of human mortality. Not only having to witness the passing of a loved one, but also being punished for even thinking about resurrecting that person. Accepting death is never an easy task, but she was forced to do so probably earlier than most people ever should, which likely led to some trauma with her needing to be comforted by both the earring and the words that Monroe had left behind, hence why she was probably subconsciously rejecting Japanese even though she did intend to relearn the language.
Whoa, this is heavy.
That said, in order to accomplish this, she would need a lot of familiar bonds to break down those mental barriers, which, hey, she just so happened to have in multiple colors. Yeah, needless to say, this was some really good stuff. Anyway, the episode ended with Majo Ririka making a brief cameo to help convince the parents to let the Ojamajo continue to work at their suddenly renovated bakery. And they managed to do this thanks to some callbacks from the previous season, and Momoko being able to talk to some random gaijin who just kind of appeared out of nowhere, and really needs to lay off those lip injections. So, yeah, that was a really damn good episode, and proper introduction for Momoko. Her conflict was very understandable, and likely relatable for anyone who has been in a similar situation as her. And aside from just her, they also did a great job shaking up the status quo with all of the class changes that can and will lead to some interesting new dynamics in the future. While Momoko was the very obvious main event of the episode, I also, again, really liked how different the regular school setting felt, with the Ojamajo now being in different classes with scatterings of their old one. It led to one of the Stooges being funny for once by bombing his act, and also helped to set up some potential new conflicts, like with Reika's queen being. On that note, the conflict she started up with Momoko really took over this episode, with the returning Ojamajo addressing some very real issues like culture shock and mortality of all things. Obviously, they can act as powerful lessons for the target audience, but also really help to define her character when you really analyze why she would default to English so much. It's the kind of great writing that works on multiple fronts by both having strong messages and layered characterization at the same time. It's really good stuff that makes this a practically flawless episode. I mean, I guess if I needed to nitpick, there might have been some superfluous scenes, like the hamster scene wasn't really needed when the Ojamajo probably could have just have walked in and talked to Mrs. Asuka. Maybe that way we also could have had a little more time to get to know Majo Monroe, but again, that's just me actively looking for nitpicks. Because overall, this is both one of the best intro episodes of the series, and maybe even overall best. Momoko's English was better than many anime characters out there, but that wouldn't really mean anything if she didn't have any friends to speak to, and not immediately understand her, but y'all can work on that. Thanks for watching, and as always, be sure to check out some of our other videos on this channel. I think Blue Archive is reaching its season 1 finale and is getting really good, so maybe check out those reviews, and also look out for the second part of our Max Heart reviews coming very soon. And until then though, for now my friends,
Holy cow! So I said we should come soon.
Yeah dude, you probably should have come sooner, and also probably learn more about how to use your transitive verbs properly.